This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber. Today on the show, I chatted with writer, podcaster, and streamer Mariam, who is the caretaker of Huetopia, a TTRPG streaming channel hosted by Black, Indigenous, and multiracial people of color. We sat down on March 13th and talked about starting out in D&D, GMing at conventions, the writing they've been doing, especially in world building and setting, and of course, Huetopia and all the wonderful shows the channel is hosting. Hello, Mariam, and welcome to Tabletop Babble. Thank you so much for coming. How are you?
Hello, I am doing great. Well, as great as I can be for a Saturday morning.
There you go, yeah. I always feel awkward asking that question, especially everything that's been going on for the last year or so.
Panera.
Yep, this panini. But yeah, so welcome to the show, and for my listeners, would you please tell us who you are and what you do in the space?
Yeah, so I'm Mariam. I go by they, them pronouns, and I am a writer, podcaster, streamer. I have a lot more hats than that, but I think that's a pretty succinct, if I have to put it into a tweet, that's what I'd go with.
So I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and I'm excited because I see your stuff, but I haven't really dove deep, and that's kind of what I like about this podcast too, is like, here's somebody that I want to get to know, come to my show, then also talk about your stuff. But usually what I ask people when they first get in, because I'm personally interested, is where did you start in tabletop role-playing games? What was the first game? Were you a GM player? What's that story?
Oh boy, I think it's one of those things where it's like, is it from way at the beginning? Like we're talking the first time I ever touched a game, or are we talking more like, okay, when was the first time you got into something professionally? Or
like the actual love. Like usually you have to like something before you potentially do it as your professional / hobby skill. So I'm interested in where did that love come from?
Yeah, so I think if I look back, I always liked telling stories, making up stories, and apparently there was something from when I was 10 where I made a map with two of my friends, and literally it looks like a peace sign, essentially, the way I've divided it up. And there's my character's land, my friend's character's land, my other best friend's character's land, and then this forbidden lands. And the map I think was there just for the sake of there was this type of, it was like a strawberry shortcake or something similar type of a doll, really itty bitty, and I just made the map so that we could write down things like what our country's land animal is, what our country's water animal is, and kind of flesh out a world. So I feel like that really was that seed for what I would do 30 years later. I think that place that ages, I'm an old. But in terms of actually playing RPGs as a whole, that's probably more like 10 years ago when I came to Canada to study, and one of my high school friends was already there and was a great help while I was struggling with being in a new country all by myself, and it was Dungeons and Dragons. That was the game that was at play at the time, but it was a homebrew game, and my friend really, with the whole homebrew thing, really encouraged this idea of playing in make-believe and playing how you want to play versus kind of following a book. There's nothing wrong with following a book if that's what you want to do, but I think that whole kind of make it your own thing was always there from the start.
Yeah, I was gonna say, especially if you're young kid making up entire worlds, just out of nothing. I love that stuff. I did the same thing too when I was a kid, but for me it was always characters. Specifically, I would draw, I don't know, I had a whole character world, and I would love to draw their the stuff that's in their backpack. So inventory management was a huge thing for me.
So a fictional what's in your bag sort of a thing.
Yeah. So Dungeons and Dragons, I think like a lot of people at a certain age, like 20s, and I'm an old as well. I'm 33 this year. And Dungeons and Dragons was my touch point too, and I'm excited for the like 18 to 20 range kids these days with getting into, they have so much more out there instead of just Dungeons and Dragons now.
I wasn't really in the RPG like game designer scene until maybe the last 5 years or so. So I feel really hesitant to basically say D&D was kind of the thing, but and from my experience at least, I only got exposure to other games in the last 5-ish years, which coincide with me being more of a content creator. But I'm pretty sure that indie games and all these other games were there existing long before. But yeah, there's so much choice nowadays, especially with like platforms like itch.io and stuff like that. D&D doesn't necessarily have to be the first game you're exposed to, I guess, was what I was trying to say.
I actually had somebody on recently that the first RPG they ever played was actually Kids on Bikes, which was like shocking to me. you know, I'm like always thinking people's first exposure is D&D, but it was really fun to hear that from them.
Or so Pathfinder, really.
Oh,
which,
yeah, or
honestly, Pathfinder's initial inception was a deviation from like 3.5 of D&D, and in a way they're the same but not the same.
Yep. So from D&D in college in Canada, like what was the next like game that you experienced?
I think it would have to be like one of those one-page games, honestly, because I think a lot of my initial playing, D&D was the thing I played because my high school friend was there, and then when he left to basically, BlackBerry died. The place I'm in, BlackBerry imploded, which meant that my friend, who was a tech person, had to find jobs elsewhere and moved to the West Coast now. So there was definitely this thing where they were the game, and them leaving created this like, well, now I need to look for other people to play with. And I think that's what led me into sort of local communities and stuff like that I wouldn't have ventured if my friend was still here. That then led to the idea of going to conventions, and like it kind of snowballed from there. And I think really from the local community groups, what we would do actually was pretty cool, where once a month we'd take over a restaurant and each table was a game. And initially I was running a lot of 5e games because those were very popular. People were like, oh, D&D, yeah, I'll sign up for that. And then over time, I'd see what the other GMs were doing, and they were playing these other games that were not dungeon delving. They were indie games, and that got me curious. Like, I think there was a Kobold game of some kind, but I don't think it was Kobolds Ate My Baby. It was something else. It was like a one-page game. And then coming across these one-page games, I think the first non-D&D game that I can recall is probably Honey Heist.
Yeah. I don't know what my exposure was, but Honey Heist was definitely one of those, like, oh my gosh, I want to try this out because it sounds ridiculous.
It's so ridiculous.
It's so ridiculous. I think for me, my entry into finding new stuff was podcasts as well. Were you a podcast listener at all at that time?
To be honest, I think I only became a podcast listener after I participated in a and this is something that this is where I met some of my favorite colleagues slash friends in the industry of like this local con was the best con because I met all these people, and also the worst con ever.
Oh, no.
It was so badly mismanaged and so many other things,
no.
and that's a conversation for another time. But I started listening to podcasts, specifically the Broadswords, because I had a panel with them, and it was reading, like, it was research information because I was a mod for that panel that nobody came to, so we ended up being like, screw that, we're gonna play we're gonna play werewolf with pieces of paper.
Uh-huh.
Because the organizers never bothered advertising that there was a panel with Asians represent and the broadswords.
Not a good experience. Not good.
But it was like it was. I mean, it goes to that whole best of cons, worst of cons sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Of like, I met some of the coolest people I could have met at the time, and it wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have happened if it were not for this con.
Yeah, so that's the silver lining of that situation.
And the broadswords is what kind of got me into like, oh, well, I mean, I think I was already starting to go to cons as a budding game, well, not game designer, because the thing is that Surzamine, which is the campaign setting I'm writing, is essentially a campaign setting. It was initially tied to D&D because that was a system I was very comfortable in, but over time it's become this is just a world in which if you need a world for any game that requires a setting, use this.
That's cool. I like that. So getting into now, you've met the broadswords and you're doing stuff at conventions. What was like because I know that you do podcasting and streaming and stuff. So how did that all happen? Like the domino effect, I suppose.
I think being exposed to the broadswords and especially Asians represent kind of gave me that push of how do I'm not very good at writing in a vacuum. I always really like sort of bouncing things off of collaborators and stuff like that. And writing an entire world from scratch is a mammoth task. I'm not even close to even having something that is finished. It's still very, I don't know, whatever, alpha, beta, omega, whatever the thing is for like early stages. And I figured a podcast and streaming is honestly the best way to world build. Because as you build with people who are excited about this world, who want to kind of add to it, and also this idea like of making sure that the games I am playing are all BIMPOC, because that way then it just there's something to be said for a very different experience with BIMPOCs, and especially all of them playing in a world versus say white players. And I definitely for this South Asian fantasy setting, I wanted all those experiences and viewpoints to be there, and to also, I guess in a way, playtest the world a little, because it'll force me to flesh things out. And then as I flesh things out, they get written, and the world gets a little bigger and a little richer, and all of those things.
That's an excellent idea. I think I've been doing it without realizing it, because I feel...
What's your world setting?
So I've been playing a campaign on my podcast Shapeshift using Huetopia, and my world is called Loam, and it's just a very... I've even started a codex now. Like I have and I'm like, oh no, I'm building a world, and this is really cool and fun, but it's very like naturalistic. There's animal people. I've never really had to think about like talking about my world to somebody else outside of the campaign. But as I've been building it and playing this game with people, it's like, oh, if I wanted to, I could write this up. Was that the same kind of thing that happened or with you? Or were you like, I purposely want to do this on the outset?
I think in terms of just timeline, it was definitely, I wanted to write. I had already been writing one-shots for D&D to run at conventions, and there were actually 2 or 3 that I could publish it to DM's Guild. The only issue is they are based off of other IPs, so I can't. So they're just my like Gen Con or convention things. Like I wrote a Witcher one-shot in D&D, and then I wrote like a deck of many things generated dungeon crawl where you don't have to do much prep beyond having a deck of many things. I have an obsession with the deck of many things. I've even made one for a friend and one for myself. I made like a very miniature one that I also take to conventions, that were printed on like good cardstock, and Yeah. So I have a little mini deck of many things that I take with me to conventions along with mini dice. Just
Oh,
for
I love it.
space because hey,
Yeah.
traveling is expensive. And if you can squeeze everything into a travel on like a carry-on, so like in terms of dungeon master supplies, I literally have everything that can fit into a pencil box. A very generous pencil box, but
Do you have pictures of this anywhere?
yeah, I think they might be on my Facebook or Instagram or something. But it's not my own artwork. I basically took the artwork that was there for the deck of many things in the DMG, and I just
Mm-hmm.
I printed them into both stamp size.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that works. I'm also love like seeing people's like GM prep bags and like how they like organize their stuff. I have only once pre the pandemic run games at conventions. Have you done that a lot?
I definitely did that a lot, and I would say that that was kind of my way to earn my badge or other things. It definitely was never like I didn't game so many games that I could get a hotel room or anything. But if I did go with a gaming group or something, that sometimes usually would cover my hotel room or something because I would room. But yeah, I think I started GMing. Actually, come to think of it, I think I started GMing because I was broke.
Really? How does that? Because like I'm like, how does GMing lead to like just so you could cover your badge? Is that basically?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. I want to go to a convention. I must GM. Is that what your first experience GMing was at conventions?
I think I think it was the gaming group first.
Okay, okay.
Because the town I'm in is incredibly white.
Mm-hmm.
So being a BIM POC there is kind of you do stick out, but also the other thing is that D&D and a lot of like like these activities are very much considered boy activities, and I think there was this whole thing of like the organizers were all essentially not white dudes, and we were trying to kind of show that hey, we want we want to welcome everyone. So it was kind of that thing where I was super nervous GMing
Yeah.
for the first time, especially in public with people I don't know.
That's why I'm asking these questions because I'm like, this would make me so nervous to do that because of being, for me, female, being a woman in the space, and then also mixed. I was like, I don't know if I could do this with a bunch of strangers because you don't know what you're going to get, which I don't think a lot of obviously white men think about whenever they like, oh yeah, I'm going to GM at a convention. Well, Amber, you should GM at a convention. I'm like, maybe not.
Yeah, and that's kind of a reason why there are certain games, even though I could technically GM them, I'm not going to name them because it might sound like I'm shaming the players or anything, and that's not my intention. It's just one of those things where if I run that game, I might get into this weird contentious space with players who are super eager to play this game because that's the game they want to play, and it's not D&D, it's like indie games, and they also just are like so super excited. They have a completely different idea of how the game's going to run versus how I think the game's going to run, because the other issue I am still struggling with a little bit is that I didn't grow up with a lot of North American cultural references. I grew up in Dubai for like 25 years before I moved here. And so there's a lot of things people take for granted that people should know if they're in this country that I don't. Like, I didn't grow up on like anime or North American Saturday morning cartoons or all of the things that would, which is why sometimes I have this kind of weird disconnect with nostalgia games. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, I think it's great game for people who want to play. It's just that I don't get anything out of it because I don't have that same nostalgia.
Right, right. Yeah, I would. I mean, obviously, like I've been just steeped in American culture. So it's like I sit down at a table and I think I've done that once or twice where I've made a reference and I'm like 3 people didn't get it. And I'm like, oh no, this is my experience. That's so interesting. Does the thought of leading a group through the creative landscapes of your imagination terrify you? Do you worry about being asked questions you don't know the answers to? Have you wanted to try being a dungeon or game master, but your social anxiety has been holding you back? Hi, I'm Amber, and I used to nearly vomit at the idea of running a tabletop RPG. How'd I get over that anxiety? I haven't. Surprise! I'm still an anxious mess, and you can listen to all of it on Shapeshift, where I've recorded 80% of every game I've ever ran. Over the last 4 years, I've run a ton of indie one-shots like Casketland, a weird Western horror game, to my first ever campaign using Huetopia, a Studio Ghibli-like exploration-focused game. Follow me through my journey learning how to GM and to live with my anxiety. It doesn't go away completely, but it does get easier to manage. Go to geekspective.com to find out more information or find Shapeshift on wherever you listen to your podcasts. So moving from like GMing at conventions in the online space, what have you been doing as far as like games, running them for streams, podcasts, etc.?
Yeah, so podcasts, there's definitely the Musafirs, which was the first podcast I started doing. And season 1 is in D&D, but season 2, which we're actually in the midst of kind of developing and recording with our new cast, Ummer is the only OG aside from me in it, and I'm so excited to see how it's all gonna work out, and I really like that vibe that's there. But season 1 was in D&D, but it was set in Surzamine, the South Asian fantasy setting that I'm writing, and it's definitely a work of love and kind of like at the time with the people who were available, really that sort of gelling and vibing of stuff. And I think the one thing that people tell me who ever listen to like the first couple of episodes is like, it's hilarious that 2 characters play a chess game to figure out who gets to throw the first punch.
That is pretty funny. What? Okay.
Yeah, and sort of unique situations that I don't want to get too much into, but it was really a fun, quirky group, and sort of the stories that we tell that are, I would say, kind of different than a lot of the D&D podcasts that can be there in terms of like, especially when they're set in sort of generic European fantasy. And this is not any shade at any podcast. It's just me sort of saying that because it's tough to be a podcaster. Like it's a lot of work. So whoever decides to put out a podcast, like hats off to you. For me, it was just the joy of being able to tell stories that were something I could culturally get and refer to, I think is what I meant to say when, I mean, it's a little different than other podcasts.
Well, sure, because like predominantly a lot of these D&D podcasts, I think the big one, of course, is the Adventure Zone, which is why I started listening to actual play podcasts in the first place. And after that, it's like just, again, it's just different. It's like when you're listening to and finding people in your own sphere that are sharing podcasts and it's the same kind of stuff. It's just different, you know, like you said, like you didn't grow up with North American cultural things. So there are lots of people like you who also did not grow up.
Honestly, I thought I did because a lot of my growing up content was like, yes, in fact, I think I relate more to British TV than I do to American TV. Because where I was, especially like in the 90s, early, like the 80s and the 90s, a lot of local TV was BBC programming. and stuff like that. So I definitely am more familiar with all of that. But I thought watching like Friends or watching I think I'm trying to think of Sesame Street would sometimes play. Like there were a couple of shows that it's like, well, I know a lot about American culture and I watch a lot of American, especially in my 20s, I was watching a lot of American programming. And I thought, okay, cool. I know stuff. I go here and I should know stuff. And then it's like, no, I know nothing at all.
Well, it's like me trying to be like, oh yeah, I know Canadian stuff because I work for a Canadian company. It's like, well, not all of it, just this one touch point, you know. It's so different than being immersed. So I'm glad. It's good to have these other experiences and stuff. I might listen to your show and I probably won't get some stuff just because of I don't have that background. But it's good to be exposed to it. It's like the same with British TV. It's like, yeah, I've watched British programming. But then I try to watch like the comedy show where it's like the end of the year wrap.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's like their news and like things that happened in, you know, the UK. And I'm like, I don't know any of these references. I do not get any of this.
I grew up on Top of the Pops. Top of the Pops. Yeah, that's what it was called. Where like I know like the British boy bands, girl bands, and everything, and I'm like, wait, you don't know what Bewitched is? And people stare at me like I have 7 heads.
Well, I mean, yeah, I just where we are and who we're surrounded with. So I've got the Musafir's podcast. Mm-hmm. What other things have you been doing in the space?
The other thing that I'm really, really proud of and super excited was last July, so 2020, me and Jess, Burst of Hope, Jess, collaborated and launched a community, like a BIMPOC community channel, Huetopia, which was something I had wanted to do for a while now, where it's like there's always this thing where people say, where are all the BIMPOC at? You know, like why is every new actual play show or something so white with maybe one little speck of melanin here and there? And I kind of wanted to challenge that thing off, like, no, if you know where to look, you'll find it. And I want to also make a space where new people who are BIMPOC and feel like, well, this is a white region, like I don't know if I can belong. I don't know if I want to deal with a lot of the issues of being the token BIMPOC in the space. And I kind of wanted to be like, no, here's a space where you can belong. I don't want to be the one-stop shop. That's not the point of Huetopia. It's just to make more space in a place where there is infinite space, especially in the virtual. And along with essentially being a community channel where people can participate or create shows, I also run a campaign show over there called Kahania, which is the season 1 was in Quest, and season 2 has just started early March. We had our first episode last Sunday, and it's in Monster of the Week.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so I'm excited you said Quest. Like, I perked up when you said that because I just did a Spotlight episode because I'm interested in playing it. How did you enjoy? Were you the GM?
I was the GM. For Kahania, and even for the Musafirs, I am usually the GM. Although we're working on a couple of episodes for the Musafirs, and who knows, maybe in future, at least for season 2, it's me, and then maybe if there's an in-between or something, maybe I might give up the reins and let one of the other cast members GM. It would be nice. Mm-hmm. Forever GM.
Yeah. Give it up. Somebody else can do it. You get to sit back and play for a while. But yeah, did you enjoy how was running Quest? And how many episodes was it?
So for Kahania, I believe we ended up doing like 10 episodes. Okay. So they're all available as VODs on Huetopia's YouTube channel. And it's interesting. It's one of those things where I think it wants to tout itself as, hey, if you want to play D&D but not have to deal with the rules, go Quest or something, like to kind of wean people off D&D. And I think that claim is not like it's not entirely accurate. I think it's a decent game on its own. It's very it tries to encourage focusing on collaborative and improv storytelling versus kind of dealing with crunch. But at least for the versions I have currently, it's there's some glaringly missing sort of classes if you're in D&D. Like there's no bard or bard equivalent. There's no cares like using your charisma sort of or using your like it's kind of scattered over all the role. Yeah, so the character's role in the group, if you want to be essentially a very charismatic, diplomatic person, because in another podcast I was in, we had recently switched over to Quest, and I was very much this diplomatic bard character in D&D, which essentially led to creating a separate custom role for me just because it just didn't fit. And the other thing I wasn't really happy about, and I realize this is starting to be like a quest dunk, and that's not what I intended it to be, is that a lot of the cares, like, where you get to persuade or like manipulate people is very much on the manipulate of like you force other people to do what you want versus say a more diplomatic of you are so persuasive that or you can kind of do this non taking away of agency from someone else that's not there.
I haven't played it yet, and I've not run. Obviously, I haven't played. I've not run it yet. I have no experience, so I'm interested in hearing it, and I've not seen any actual plays yet. I haven't had time to watch, and
any actual play you watch of mine, you're not going to learn how the game works. I'm just telling you straight up.
Sure.
I've said even with like the Musafirs, if you think you're going to learn how D&D works, you're not. The rules kind of I toss them out the window.
It's fair enough. But yeah, so like I'm interested in I'm glad to hear that feedback, because it sounds like, for me, what I was worried about, and again, we're turning this into a Quest talk. We'll get off of Quest in a second. Just hold on, everybody. I like a little bit more crunch, and so I'm wondering how it's going to feel for me to play it. Because it's like, do I feel like I'm actually, like, growing as a character and adding things on and getting... That's kind of what my one, like, it's on the outset critique or like criticism or potential wariness of it is.
I would say in terms of like leveling and things like that, it's very milestone. It says to level at the end of a session, but if you're not playing for 3 or 4 hours once a week or every couple of weeks or whatever, or if you're doing an actual play, then it just makes more sense within a game, like when the GM says so. And it's one of those things where, especially if you're used to D&D, it feels like you there's something special when you level, or at least there's that feeling of like, ooh, I get to choose this, I get to choose that, I get to do a whole bunch of things, and it's a whole almost ritual. With Quest, which I think is kind of this like compromise between the PBTA style of just grab another move, like making a Quest character takes, I would say, 5, maybe 10 minutes at most, versus maybe the half an hour you would spend on a D&D character sheet. And so Quest has that PBTA feeling of, hey, you can just pick this up and play. You just have to fill in a couple of questions and you're good to go. And you just get to pick like 6 abilities, which are similar to moves in a way. And it's just... the leveling, I think the one thing, like for me and within PBTA games and similar style, is that I do kind of miss that crunch that is there, that ritual of leveling that can be there with D&D versus, and that's my personal preference. Because it's one of those things where it's like, please don't tweet at me saying that I said this like X is, like, this like black and white, absolute like my opinion is not a law by any stretch of the imagination. Please don't come at me.
Same here, because like for me, it's all about like your personal preference in games. Like, there's nothing inherently incorrect about quests. It just doesn't hit the things in for you, and maybe not for somebody else either. I mean, for me, it's inventory stuff. Oh, I love inventory
Oh
management,
yeah,
and
and
like
you're
quest is like,
limited to 12 items.
yeah,
But
exactly.
it's not even the things that are in your backpack. If you could easily get it, don't even write it down. You just have it.
Yeah, which again, it's like for people who don't want to fuss with inventory, this game's perfect for you. Whereas like me, I'm like, in my D&D 3.5 game, I had an actual ledger that I kept and tracked money.
Oh yeah.
Because,
Oh, and that's the other thing. No money in the
yep,
quest.
no money.
And the thing is that I would say it's more of a I don't think I adapted very well to it because a lot of times like it basically says for money, if the players can acquire it, just assume they can get it and don't worry about it. Similar
Sure.
to
Yeah.
inventory. However, if something's not easy to get, it's now essentially a fetch quest or a favor trade with an NPC, and I'm just like, oh great, I already have problems with the give them a worse choice or give them a devil's choice or something whenever they roll poorly, and now I have to come up with random quests for this incredibly hard thing to find that I just wanted to basically be like, it's hard to find because it's expensive.
Yeah, I'm still excited to play Quest, and my like initial opinions and everything are still there, so I'm good. I just know I just wanted to get your, as a person who has run it for 10 episodes on your show, I wanted to hear what you had to say about it. So for Huetopia, let's go back to Huetopia, because I've been seeing it grow online, and it's been awesome to see, because I've got your schedule up right now. You guys got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and I have to really thank the community for that because it's like, even though I'm like a co-admin, I I don't populate things in a vacuum. It has to be people who want to be here and who want to play. And the other thing is that we also, any show that goes on, unless it's explicitly for charity or something of that sort, we pay our people.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, it's peanuts, but the point is we make the token of saying, hey, we value your time and we want you to know that you can get into paid gigs.
mm-hmm.
Because like it's one of those things where I don't want people to necessarily, and even the other organizers and people leading Huetopia believe the same thing of, we don't want people to think you have to grind and essentially give your time and spoons for nothing to be able to make it in the world. Exposure. We don't pay exposure unless that was already an agreement ahead of time.
Yes. Well, I applaud you. That's amazing. So, what, if you can go quickly, do you want to talk about what you guys have going on right now on Utopia?
Yeah, so we've got, so just counting off the top of my head, we've got three actual plays, one of which is Kahania. Then tonight, I believe the first episode of Donuts and Duels, which is a Kids on Brooms game, is happening. That's going to be, I think, but I don't know when the recording's going on, but essentially it's Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So as of this recording, the first episode is going up. And we also have Cape and Blade, which is they had a season 1 last year, set in Chimera, which is a game system by Ryan Bolter and Ummer working together, which is super cool. They're coming back for a second season, which I believe last night was also their first Friday. So Friday evenings is when they go up. And we also have a Game at a Glance, which is a game that Morgan, so Cyrena Bezos on Twitter, is doing, which is essentially just reviewing and talking about indie games, and especially focusing on indie games with marginalized creators. And that's, we had our first episode last week, which was a lot of fun, and I'm super excited for that. In addition, we also have two shows which are, I think they basically are shows that are occasionally, we don't have a set schedule, but if they are going to be airing, they'll be airing on Wednesdays and Thursdays. So one show is Game Roulette, which we've already had a really cool, like, I think 10 or 12 episodes already last year, where we play one-shots. And it's just a big rotating cast of whoever's around to play. We had quite a few cool games. We had Quest, we had a View Scream, we had we had Stupot, we had like a lot of fun like games, and then Palette is our panel discussion show similar to this, where we either have a panel on a particular topic with panelists, or Jess or I or whoever is hosting interviews a person in the space.
Whoa. A lot going on, because yeah, like I said, I've seen it growing, especially with Morgan doing stuff on the show, Serena Bezos, who I've had connections with, and it's like, yes, more Morgan online.
Oh yeah, and the Kids on Brooms game is being facilitated by Morgan. And Morgan's also in Kahania.
That's great. So if somebody wanted to go check out any of this, is it just on YouTube?
It's on Twitch, so the live shows, whether they're pre-recorded or not, you can watch them live on Twitch. So it's twitch.tv/Huetopia. So Huetopia. And then if you just Google Huetopia TV, or if you search for Huetopia TV on YouTube, and I can send you those links, you can watch the VODs there.
Awesome. So then you've got your shows, Huetopia, and then you're writing your campaign setting. Is there anything else that you've been doing as far as writing or other? Because you said you had many hats.
Yeah. So I've been doing quite a few freelance writing gigs, and the ones I can talk about recently is I was a freelance writer for Pathfinder's Lost Omens Moangi Expanse, and that is such a great, like, it's very much inspired by African diaspora and African cultures. And I got to write a section. I'm not sure if I can talk about the particular section, but we just got an advanced copy of like the final layout. And oh my God, it's like I kind of burst close to crying, because seeing the stuff, like my words, like it's 90 to 95% literally my words, with obviously some editing and stuff to make it all work and mesh, and it's amazing. But seeing my thoughts, my words on a printed page of a official book, and seeing artwork based on the words I wrote, is just like, oh my God, like, it's...
You're gonna make me cry.
Yeah, like I'm tearing up, just like, and that was the first time. Another book that is going to come out in summer as well is Thirsty Sword Lesbians, for which I wrote a playbook and a campaign setting, and I think I can talk about that. And it's the Naga, which is sort of the playbook is sort of focusing on a marginalized identity where you're being oppressed by a very capitalist and exploitive community, and kind of playing on that. And then the setting is essentially you get to play in a world that is that, and defining what that is, including the propaganda and myth, which can be quite interesting if you're into a more grittier game of Thirsty Sword Lesbians. And that comes out, I think in June. Don't quote me on that.
Okay. Disclaimer, may not actually be June.
But I know it's summer. It's pretty soon.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm still like
wiping away the one NPC, like, I can kind of vague talk about. It's a very important NPC for this particular community or people that I wrote, of like a particular clan. And it has its own page, and just like the copy I wrote for it, and then the image of her with her hair described, her clothing described with all these cool little things I had put in that I didn't actually expect to somehow make it to art. It's this weird thing where it's like I didn't expect it to make it to art, but of course it would be. And then there's a companion as well, just looking up with these like cute eyes, and I'm just like, oh my goodness.
Oh, I don't know. I'm so happy for you. That's such a good feeling.
Like I would blow up that page and just put it like somewhere where I can stare at it.
Just put it up there on your wall, poster size, looking at it. That's awesome. So if people wanted to see your work, get updates on your work, where could they do that?
I'm still working on my website. I mean, I have the domain name.
Hey, that's part of the battle. You're a third of the way there.
Yeah, but I think the best way to get a hold of me and see what I'm doing is definitely Twitter. I kind of live. It's the love it hate it sort of a relationship. So it would be at Media_Junkie. It's a weird name.
I mean, are you a media junkie?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's something, I think that was, like, I have two kind of brands I'm known as. One was 13-year-old me picking a name, which, now that I think about it, probably might be a little ableist. The second one is Media Junkie, because that's when, I decided in high school that I wanted to make films and be in TV, and then, I kind of went into mass comm, and then it was this whole, I'm just like inundated by media, and I just consume media a lot, so I'm a media junkie.
Hey, you know what? That's fine. I don't know what mine is. I have a story behind mine. It's Rocket Orca. It's also a weird one, but whatever.
Please, do tell.
This isn't about... You want to hear it? Okay,
yes.
Maybe I don't think Tabletop Babble has heard it. So Rocket Orca, it is because I used to work at a newspaper, and I would come home like at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and my roommates would still be up, and they would usually be high and like scrolling through like Netflix. And then we had this game where it's just like we would try to guess what the movie was about just on like the picture of the movie. And I had a really long day, a really stressful day. I had drank so much coffee. I had not partaken of any drugs, but I sat down on the couch and they landed on Free Willy 2. And the cover of Free Willy 2, it just looks like the kid is on a whale and he's shooting through space. And my mind just broke when I saw it, and I just started laughing. And then the rest of the people were like, what is so funny? And all I could get out was Rocket Orca. And that has been my name since I was like 22.
I didn't even realize it was Rocket Orca. I kind of read it as like one word, like Rocketera or something like that.
It's fine. Not a lot of people do. And like, again, I should probably put an underscore under there. Like your name, Media_Junkie. So everybody go to Media_Junkie, follow Mariam, and then also follow Huetopia and check out all the shows. Thank you so much for coming on. This was a great chat, and I will see you online, hopefully, more often.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at Rocket Orca, Kenny as at Volfmir, and John is at Crossways GM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards.